Today's live training session, the focus is on 2D games for non-programmers. And to teach this, we are going to use a package of content, a Unity project called the Playground Project, which was created by Ciro Continisio, who is a member of our evangelism team in Europe. And the project came about because he was teaching workshops to groups of students and felt that he needed some kind of supporting tools to get them going without getting into a bunch of programming right away to allow them to start working in Unity and to make some kind of basic 2D games. So we're going to be exploring that today and making a little simple game that you see a screenshot of right here. This session is appropriate for beginners. There will be no text-based programming going on. We're just going to be dragging and dropping stuff in the editor, and it should be a lot of fun. So let's get started. So first of all, what I will do is show you the game that we're going to build. So here I have the finished version of the game. I will play the scene. And so here we have this kind of goofy looking bird. He's getting chased by these rockets, and there are these bombs flying across the screen. And we have to kind of navigate through without getting hit by the rockets or the bombs and make our way to the, let's see if I can make it. Whoop. Yes, we get to the top and it says you won. And it's lots of fun. And if you get hit, you will, let's see if I can hit one of these rockets. These guys are actually expiring a little quickly. Yeah, so if you get hit, it will reset the game. And reload the scene, and either by the rockets or by the bombs. And so this is created using two pieces of content. The first is, let me break this out into a separate window. The first is this Playground project, Unity project, which I just described, created by Ciro. And so in order to access this, you're going to go to this page, github.com, Unity Technologies Playground Project, and click on the clone or download zip option here. If you're familiar with source control, this is probably not the session for you. So let's just stick with the download zip option. And then once you have that downloaded, it will appear on your hard drive, usually in your downloads folder, and we're just going to unzip that. I'll just extract it right here. And that contains a couple of folders, including a Unity project folder called Playground Project. So we'll have this master folder, and then this subfolder here, Playground Project, which contains the assets and the project settings, is the Unity project. So in Unity, we're going to open that up. Now it's worth noting, I am using Unity 5.4.2 F1, which was the newest release as of Thursday. I don't think there's been a new one since then. But anything later than 5.4 is going to work. I believe there's an issue if you try to open this with 5.3. So please be aware of that. So I'm going to go to File, Open Project, and navigate to my folder that I just unzipped here and choose Select Folder. That's going to open this. There may be a little warning here. This is saying that this was made with 5.40 F3 and I've got 5.42. That's fine, right? Because I have a newer version. So we'll hit Continue. And it's going to import the assets. And then open us up with an empty scene and all of this content in folders. Now we are going to, there are actually a folder of sprites made by the excellent Kenny, who makes a ton of awesome free game art assets that anybody can use. It's a really incredible service he provides. But we're actually going to use some sprites that were drawn by Pete Lee of the R&D content team, of the team that I'm a part of. And we're going to get them from the asset store. So we're going to go to Windows, Asset Store, or Window Asset Store. And then in here, we're just going to search for 2D pack sprites. These were previously as part of a package called 2D pack that had a bunch of games in it, and I just put these up as a separate package with just the sprites to make that a little easier. So this is what it looks like. You're just going to hit, yours will say download. I've already downloaded these. I'm just going to hit import. It's going to open this dialog. We're going to import everything. And that will place these in this sprites folder here, which is fine. So I can now close the tab for the asset store because we're done with that. And we're going to begin putting together our scene. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to set up our player. So I'm going to grab this bird enemy flap sprite and just drag it into the hierarchy. This will create a new game object with a sprite renderer component attached and that sprite that we dragged in assigned. What we want to do is we want to be able to move this game object using the keys on the keyboard. So we're going to use one of the scripts that are part of the Playground project. So I'm going to unfold the scripts folder. We'll see here we have a movement subfolder. And in here, there's a folder called Move with Arrows. We're going to take that, drag it onto the bird enemy flap sprite. And when we add it, it's going to add two components. It's going to add the Move with Arrows script, and it's also going to add a rigid body 2D component. The rigid body 2D component allows the game object to be affected by physics. So it can have forces applied to it. It can be affected by gravity. And so actually right now the gravity is on. So if we play our scene, our bird will fall off the screen. So we're going to go ahead and set the gravity scale to 0 in the rigid body 2D component. We don't want it to actually be affected by gravity. And now in the Move with Arrows script that we added, we have a choice of a type of control, whether we want to use arrow keys or WASD. I'm going to use WASD because I just prefer that. We have a movement speed, and we also have a choice for, is the player going to be allowed to move in all directions, only horizontally, or only vertically? In this case, we want all directions, so that's good. We also have a choice for orient to direction. This will turn the sprite to face, or turn the game object to face in the direction we're moving. In this case, we don't need that. So I'm going to leave it off. Now, if we play the scene and move with the arrow keys, we can see that our player moves, but they're kind of skating around. Even if we just tap the arrow a little bit, it kind of drifts a lot. So what we're going to do is we're going to adjust the linear drag property of the rigid body 2D to add some drag to this rigid body and cause it to slow down a little bit once it stops receiving force. So let's set that to 10, hit play, and now we can see I move, and then if I let go of the key, it drifts a little bit, but it doesn't sort of slide all over crazily. We're also going to up the movement speed a little bit to, let's say, 8. Give that a try. And that feels okay to me. Now, of course, these settings are gonna depend very much on the feel that you want for your game, right? And that's kind of part of the fun of this, is being able to tweak the settings to create the feeling that you want. So feel free to play around with that and experiment. All right. So now that we have our player moving, we're going to start to create a little environment for the player to move in. So we're going to set up our walls that the player sort of travels in between. We're going to go down to our sprites folder, and we're going to grab this plank sprite. And again, we're just going to drag it into the hierarchy. And we can see that it comes in oriented horizontally. We're going to go up to the transform component, and in the Z rotation, type in 90 to rotate it 90 degrees. Then we're going to take the position and set it to -5. So we're just moving it 5 units to the left. We could also use the move tool and just drag it, but I find that doing it numerically is nice and precise. So now we have our kind of first segment of our wall, but we can just pass right through it, right? There's no collision detection going on. And so we need to set that up. So we're going to go ahead. First of all, let's relabel these. We will make this plank sprite wall, and let's name the bird sprite player. So I'm just selecting it, and then in the inspector, we can just type the name. All right. So in order to block the player from moving through the wall, we need to add a collider to the wall, and we also need to add a collider to the player. Now, for the wall, we're going to use what's called a box collider 2D. So with the wall selected, we're going to go to Add Component and navigate to Physics 2D, and then select Box Collider 2D. Now, when we do this, we can actually see in the scene view, if we zoom in a little bit with the mouse and pan over by right-clicking and dragging, we can see that this green box has appeared around the plank, and this is actually matching the boundaries of our artwork pretty well. So that is representing the bounds of the collider. So I think that works. So let's go ahead and add a circle collider to the player. So we're going to select the player, choose Add Component, navigate to Physics 2D, and choose Circle Collider 2D. Now, in this case, it doesn't match the artwork so well, right? We can see it's a little too big, so we're going to adjust this. In the Circle Collider 2D component here, we're going to take the radius and click and drag next to it to drag it down. You could also enter it numerically. Here I've got a value of about 0.36. Maybe we go to 0.33. So as we can see, right, this is not completely covering the artwork. When setting up colliders for the player, I generally prefer to give them a little wiggle room on the sides so that if they get a near miss where they almost would hit something, or actually the artwork would hit it, they can kind of actually skate by. It tends to feel better. Usually for kind of enemies, you want to make the hitbox bigger, and for the player, you want to make it a little smaller. But again, that's something that you can feel out yourself and play around with. So now, with colliders on each, we can test, and we can see we can now no longer pass through the wall, right? So that is working as intended. So now let's just quickly lay out these walls so that we can have some boundaries to our level. So I'm going to select the wall and press Control D on the keyboard. This is on Windows. On Mac, it will be Command D. So Control D, and then I'm just going to flip this. So I'm going to set the position to +5 instead of -5. And that'll put it 5 units to the right. And now I'm just going to shift click to select both of these, Control D again, and now I'm going to use the move tool to just move these up a little bit. And I'm going to repeat the process. Click on the bottom, shift click to the top to select them all, Control D, drag them up. Don't worry about making them perfect. As long as they're sort of generally there and there's no gap big enough for the player to get through, it'll work fine. Let's zoom out with the mouse wheel a little bit, Control D again. Put these down here, shift click to select, Control D. Maybe we'll do this one more time. Again, let's zoom out a little bit more. And I think that is going to be good enough. So now, if we play the scene, we have walls, but we notice, right, whoops, if we crash into the walls, we can kind of roll along them, which is kind of funny looking, but probably not quite what we want for this game. So the next thing that we're going to do is highlight the player, and in the rigid body 2D component, we're going to go to Constraints, expand that, and choose Freeze Rotation on the Z or Z axis. Now, the player is not going to be allowed to rotate even if they collide with the wall and roll along it. The other thing that we're going to want to do is cosmetic, but I think it's nice, is to set up a quick background. So in the sprites folder, we have a sprite called Sky Tile Sprite, and we are just going to grab this and drag it into the hierarchy. Now, you'll notice that when we do that, it blocks out everything that we just did. And this is because we haven't, oh, and actually I accidentally dragged it onto the player, which I don't want. I'm going to drag it above so that it's just at the top layer of the hierarchy, not attached to anything. So this is because we haven't defined or we haven't assigned anything to what are called sorting layers. So sorting layers allow us to determine which sprites are going to be rendered in front of or on top of other sprites relative to the camera, right? So right now, the sky tile sprite is in front or on top of everything else and therefore blocking it out. And we actually want it to be in the background. So with the sky tile sprite selected, we can see in the sprite renderer component, there's this sorting layer field. And if we click on it, we'll see we have 3 choices. Normally, there's just the default choice, but these were actually predefined in the Playground project. So we're going to go ahead and set this sprite renderer to background. And then I'm just going to take it and move. We can see, right, that now it becomes visible behind the other elements. I'm going to move it down, and then I'm just going to repeat my duplicating process. I'm just going to duplicate it a few times. Let's zoom out, duplicate. And these are designed so, again, they'll kind of, it's just this blue, so they'll repeat fairly easily. Don't need to be super precise about lining them up. And maybe one extra at the bottom. So I'm just pushing Control D and moving them down with the Move tool. Now, let's test. So now we're not spinning around, but the problem is we can see we can move up and down in the scene view, but in the game view, we just move off camera and become invisible, right? And that is not what we want. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to set things up so that our camera will follow our player. Before we do that, let me just look at the chat and see how you guys are doing. Okay, people like the rolling. Yeah, the rolling is funny. Everybody is saying, please put the walls in a wall object. Yeah, I'm about to do that. I just wanted to put the sky tiles in as well so that we could put everything in an environment object. So something that people are mentioning in the chat is that we've kind of filled up our hierarchy with all these walls and the sky background, right? So what we can do to sort of clean that up, let me move this down, is we can create a holder object, right? So we're going to go ahead to game object, create empty, and we're going to call this environment. And then what we're going to do is shift click on our bottommost sky tile and our topmost wall or sky tile or whatever's at the top there that's part of the environment, and just drag it onto this environment holder object and collapse it, right? Now our hierarchy is much easier to look at, and all this stuff is sort of safely hidden. This is not going to affect the gameplay. This is really just to make our scene a little bit more organized. All right, so let's see what else. All right, great. So let's continue. So now, looks like people are doing mostly okay in the chat. And so the next thing that we're going to do is set things up so that our camera will follow the player. So we're going to need another script to do this, and we have one in the movement folder here within the scripts folder. And this is called, perhaps predictably, camera follow. So we're going to grab this and drag it onto the main camera. Drag it and drop it onto the main camera. Now we can select the main camera, and we can see that we have this camera follow component that's been added. There's a little hint here that says this script makes the camera follow a specific object, usually the player. So here we have a single field for the object to follow, the target, which is a transform. And so right now, because we haven't assigned it, we have a helpful warning saying, warning, no object is selected, the camera won't move, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to drag a reference to the player. So we're going to drag the player from the hierarchy onto the target field. The warning will disappear because we've now configured things correctly. And if we play our scene, we can now move around and fly out of our level if we want. And we can see that the camera now nicely follows the player. Now, this has kind of revealed a little bit of problem with our scene, which is that this blue over on the sides, but luckily that's easy to fix. Another detail for people who are mentioning in the chat, the red tint. This is play mode tint, and it's just useful to remind you that you actually are running in play mode. Sometimes you'll be in play mode and you pause and you start editing things, and then you forget you're in play mode and you exit play mode and you lose all your work, right? Because any changes made in play mode to anything in the scene will not be saved when you exit play mode, right? So I like to turn the play mode tint on to remind myself that that's what I'm doing. If you want to turn it on, you're going to go to Edit. Let's see, where is it? Preferences, Colors, Play Mode Tint. And we can change it to like a lovely blue, for example. It's probably a little easier on the eyes anyway. Okay, so now let's fix our background issue. So we've got the main camera highlighted. All we need to do is change the clear flags on the camera to a solid color. I mean, actually, it's a solid color now because there's no skybox assigned, but let's just change it to solid color. And then the background color, we're going to use the eyedropper tool here, and we can see now anything we mouse over is going to be set to that color. And we're just going to take the kind of fill color for the sky, which is this kind of gray blue. Click on that, and now the background for the camera is set to match the main color of this image. And if we play, we can see we go to the edges and it just looks like it continues. And even if we fly out of our artwork, we can, just continue flying in sort of empty sky. So there we go. All right. So now that we've got a little environment set up, we've got a background, we've got the camera and the player moving, we are going to set up some hazards. Our first set of hazards, which are going to be the hats that shoot bombs. And so I'm going to start actually by shift clicking to select the player and the camera and just using the move tool to just move them down a little bit. And we're going to drop in our hat sprite. So I'm going to go to the sprites folder and choose the hat sprite, drag it in, and that is going to place it here at the origin in the scene view. And what we're going to do is we're going to rotate this 90 degrees, and I'm going to move it over here to the side and actually move this plank out of the way behind it. And I'm doing this with the move tool selected. And you can quickly switch to the move tool using the W key. You can switch between all these tools up in the top using Q, W, E, R, T. Little tip. So we'll put this here behind it. In fact, we could probably do without it, but I'm not going to worry about that for now. And so we've got our hat and our little sort of gap in the wall. And so the first thing that we want to do, now that we have our hat set up, is we need to create the projectile that it's going to launch, right? Which is the bomb. So let's go ahead and grab our bomb lit sprite and drop it in. And so we're going to want this to both move and to register collisions. So we're going to first add the script that's going to make it move, which is going to be under scripts, movement, auto move. So this is just going to cause this object to continuously move. We can see that when we added the auto move script, it automatically added the required rigid body 2D component. If we wanted to add that by hand, we could do it by going to add component, physics 2D, rigid body 2D as well. But in this case, we have it. The gravity scale, we do not want to be on because we don't want this to fall as soon as it's spawned. So we're going to set this to 0. Currently, it's going to automatically move along the x-axis in a positive direction. If we play, we can see what that looks like. So right now it's moving towards our hat and it's not colliding with anything. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to reverse that direction by making it -1. And we're going to add a collider. So we're going to choose Add Component, Physics 2D, Circle Collider 2D. Now we can test. And we can see it's working, but the collider is not quite aligned with the artwork. So I'm going to make sure that the bomblet sprite is selected, put my mouse over the scene view and push F to frame selected. That'll zoom in on whatever is selected. And I'm just going to adjust the radius here. I'm going to pull the radius down, and then I'm going to use the offset parameters. I'm just clicking and dragging on the X and Y labels to just ballpark it in there, get it close. That's fine. I'm not going to obsess over it. And now that should be able to collide in a kind of a plausible way. All right, very good. So now that's part of the behavior that we want, but the kind of real key game mechanic here is that we want it to reload the level when it hits the player. So let's go ahead and add a script that's going to do that. So this script is going to come from the conditions folder within the scripts folder, and it's called condition collision. So we're going to grab this, drag it on, and we can see in the tip here it says use this script to perform an action when this game object collides with another. So we've already got our collision working. So now we can choose whether we want to have it happen only once. In this case, it'll be okay because it'll reload the level automatically as soon as it hits. We can choose to filter by tag. So for example, if you were subtracting health from the player, you would want to make sure it happened only once, right? So it wouldn't just keep colliding with them and take away all their health, over the next few frames. In this case, it's going to reload the level, so it's okay. Filter by tag is important here. Filter by tag allows us to check what tag has been assigned to the object that we collided with. So currently, this has a tag of untagged. If we look at our player is also untagged. Now, we actually want to tag our player as player so that when the bomb collides with it, we can detect that the game object that we collided with was in fact the player. So we're going to click on the tag menu here and select player from the list of tags. If you want, you can add your own tags, but there's a number of helpful tags already defined here that work with the scripts in the Playground project. So I kind of recommend sticking with these for now. We're going to go ahead and select player. And now on the bomb, which we can rename, let's just call it bomb. On the bomb, it's going to check, did I collide with the player? And then if that evaluates to true, if that object was tagged player, then we're going to do an action. So we have here in this folder a number of gameplay actions. And right now, the list of actions that we're going to do is empty. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to make a new slot by hitting the plus button that we're going to put the action that we're going to assign in there. So with that done, now we're going to go into our actions subfolder. This is in scripts, conditions, actions. And we'll see that we have, among others, this load level action. And so we're going to take this, drag it onto the bomb, select the bomb, and now we can see use this script to restart the level or load another one, meaning to load another Unity scene. The scene to load in this case is just to reload the current scene. We could also select another scene that's in the project, but in this case, reloading is going to work for us. So with that behavior added, the next step is to assign it to this field here in the condition collision component. So we're going to click on the name of the script and drag it up to this slot. And so that it now shows the action that's going to be executed is this load level action on the game object bomb. And that's all we need to do for that. So now we can give it a quick test. And we can see if an object which is tagged player collides with it, it will reset the level. So that's working nicely. Now, the only thing that the other concern here is that we're going to be spawning these repeatedly, so we don't want them to just build up and pile up and stick around in the level. So we're going to go ahead and add a script from the destruction folder here called timed self-destruct. And so we're going to take this, drop it on the bomb, and this just means that the bomb is going to disappear after the number of seconds specified in the time to destruction field has passed. And I think I found that something like 3.25 was a good number just in my own testing. And we'll test that in a second. So now that we've added everything that we want and that our bomb is doing everything that we want, we need to be able to spawn multiple copies of it out of the hat. And in order to do that, we need to make what's called a prefab. So a prefab is like a template or a blueprint for a game object, which includes all of the attached components. So let's select the prefabs folder and drag the bomb from the hierarchy into the prefabs folder in the project view. This is going to create a new asset in the prefabs folder on the hard drive called bomb. And now we can actually delete the instance of it that's in the hierarchy because it's now been saved as a prefab in the project folder. So now that we have our kind of template for our bomb ready to go, let's set up the spawning behavior. So before I do that, let me take a look at the chat and see how we're doing. Right now, the player could actually escape through the hole where the hat is, but you'll see why that will be difficult. But yeah, actually, you totally could do that. All right, so let's keep cooking. So now we want to spawn our bomb. So what we're going to do, we're going to highlight the hat, and let's go ahead and change it to hat shooter instead of hat sprite. And we are going to add a script to it from the creation folder in scripts here. So we're going to add this auto object spawner script. What this is going to do is add a box collider 2D, which we can see appears here. And this is going to define the area in which the objects are going to randomly spawn. So this is like the bounding area for the spawn, the random spawn range inside this box. So the first thing that I'm going to do is actually make this much smaller because I don't want such a wide area for things to spawn in. We'll do something like that. And then we're going to want to make sure that as they're spawning, our objects are not going to collide with this collider here. So I'm going to turn the isTrigger property on, which is going to mean that it's still possible to record or register collisions, but it's not going to prevent things from passing through that space. And so now so the box collider 2D was required by the auto object spawner, so it added it automatically. So now in the hint for the auto object spawner, it says that it spawns an object repeatedly in a square area. And so what we're going to do is we need to define the prefab to spawn, right? And that's going to be the prefab that we just created. So let's go over to our prefabs folder, grab our bomb, drop it on there, and we're ready to go. The other option is the spawn interval, which is how often we want them to spawn. In this case, it's going to be every 1 second, which works for me. So now we can play our scene. We can see that our objects are spawning at random, and that little 3.25 auto destroy number that I put in there just gives them enough time to cross across the level and disappear right before they hit the wall. So we can go up here and we've got our first little hazard that we need to get through. And I kind of like having that little bit of randomness there so it's not just a straight line. You can play around with that by adjusting the size of the bounding box. And then obviously if we get hit, we zip back to the starting point. So that is working nicely. Now, the same way we created a prefab for our bomb, we can create a prefab for our hat shooter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this over into the prefabs folder. And that's going to create a prefab of the hat shooter, including the components that we added. And so now I'm just going to go up here, just delete. Oh, actually, one thing I want to do, I'm going to add the plank to the hat shooter. So let's just grab this one plank. This is going to make it easier, so I can just delete, and I'm going to drag it down, drop it on the hat shooter so it becomes a child of the hat shooter. And now, in order to save that change that I've made to the prefab, I'm going to click the Apply button here in the inspector. And now it's going to turn blue, and we can see in the project that now the hat shooter has a wall attached to it. And this is useful because now I can just go up here, delete this wall, and just drag in a new hat shooter, and it's got the wall there behind it. Okay, so now that's fine, right? But let's say we want to have some bombs that are going the other way. Well, we're going to need to make 2 new prefabs. We're going to need to make a bomb that moves, instead of towards the left, that moves towards the right. And that's easy to do. So the first one we're going to rename to bomb left. And now I'm just going to hit Control D with the prefab asset highlighted in the project view and rename it to bomb right. And I'm just going to flip the X direction here. So instead of moving in the -1 direction, we're going to move in the +1 direction. And that is in the auto move component that's already attached. So now I'm going to let's delete one more wall. Maybe we'll do this one. And I'm going to drag in my hat shooter and position it about there, and then just rotate the whole thing instead of +90 degrees, -90 degrees. And instead of spawning bomb left, we're going to drag in bomb right. And then we'll label this hat shooter right and drag it in here to make a prefab of it. And we'll relabel this one hat shooter left. Okay, so now I'm going to right click and drag to pan up a little bit. Let's delete this one. Drop in a left shooter. I'm not going to be super fussy about this. We're just going to do it a little bit quickly. Drop in a right one, but you can see once you start to make some of these kind of building blocks, you know, it gets kind of fun. You can start to get into some level design. You can play around with it a little bit more, and whoops, that's the wrong one. Things get, you know, pretty drag and drop. And you can kind of get into some of the fun stuff of level design. Maybe we'll do 2 right ones in a row. Just to switch it up on them. Oops. All right, that's fine. So there we go. We got our bunch of different hat shooters, and let's give it a test. So hit play. Start moving up. We can see our bombs are spawning. They're disappearing. And we can navigate our way up. Now, the thing that makes this not very fun, right, is I can just sit and wait for a gap in the stuff, and there's nothing really forcing me to sort of keep moving forward, right? So we're going to want to add another hazard, which is going to force the player to continuously move upward. And we can add our hat shooters to the environment at this point, I would say. Let's just shift click to select them all and drag them onto the environment. And now we're going to add another sprite or another instance of our hat sprite. Drag it in, and I'm going to make it huge. Giant, ominous death hat here. Place it down there at the bottom. And this is going to spawn our missiles. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab our rockets, rather. So we're going to grab this rocket sprite, drop it in, comes in, also huge. And so we're going to make this maybe 0.3 by 0.3, make it a little smaller. So it's still big, but not as big. And we're going to add a script from the movement subfolder of scripts, auto move towards player. So this is going to cause this game object to continuously attempt to move towards the player. So we're going to take this, drag it onto our, let's relabel this from rocket sprite to rocket, maybe rocket enemy. It's going to automatically add a rigid body. We can turn off the gravity scale, set the gravity scale to 0, and the default speed here of 1 I think is fine. And here we have a choice whether we want to look at the player. And in this case, we do. This is going to rotate the sprite to try to face towards the player. And when we test it initially, we can see that rotating it along the up axis is not quite what we want, right? So we're going to switch it so that it is facing right relative to where it started. And now we can see it's going to chase the player, but it does not yet have a collider, so it can't do anything to the player, right? So let's add that collider now. So I'm going to go to, with the rocket enemy selected, I'm going to go to Add Component, Physics 2D, Box Collider 2D. And the Box Collider 2D is going to come in basically, you know, good enough. We can make it a little smaller maybe. Let's scale it a little bit along the Y, you know, something like that is fine. Give the player a little chance there. And we're also going to add a collision action like we had for the bombs. So let's go back to our conditions folder, grab condition collision, drop it on. In this case, filter by tag and player works as well. We're going to create an empty slot and then drag in our action to load the level. So we're going to choose load level action, drop it on the rocket enemy. So this is the same as what we did for the bomb. Once that's in, reload level is okay. We're just going to take this and drop it on the gameplay action slot that we created. And now let's test. Boop. Okay, so we can see it's resetting, right? It's chasing the player and it's resetting. So that works. So now that we've done that, we're going to spawn these similar to what we did for the other hats. We're going to spawn the rockets from the giant mega hat of doom down here. So we're going to grab the rocket enemy and make a prefab of it so that we can spawn copies of it. We're going to delete it from the hierarchy. I'm just selecting it and pressing the delete key on the keyboard to do that. And now we are going to add to, let's call this Hat of Doom. And we're going to add a creation behavior auto object spawner like we used for the hats. Let's make sure this is selected. Press F to frame selected. It's added a big collider on it. We're going to go ahead and make this much smaller by adjusting the size of the collider, the X and the Y size. Let's make it something like that. Make sure it's a trigger so the rockets don't bounce off it. And then go to our prefabs folder, select the rocket enemy, and drop it in here. And I think spawning every 1 second, maybe we'll make it every 2 seconds so they don't pile up too much. With that done, we're almost there. So if now we play, it's spawning these rockets. If they hit us, we're done. And now we have a little bit more of an interesting, challenging game because we've got to kind of make our way with these rockets on our tail. We could adjust the speed if we wanted to. And now all we need is a win condition. So we've gotten all the way to the top. There's no way to win. Life is hopeless, right? So let's go up here to the top and we're going to create, we could put the Hat of Doom into the environment now that we've got it set up. And we're going to go ahead and create a game object, empty, select game object menu, create empty. And it's positioned more or less where we want it. We're going to want it to be 0 on the X and around, let's say 50 on the Y. So it's above our or you could just position it visually. So it's basically above the end of your tunnel. And then we're going to add a box collider component. So we're going to go to box collider 2D. We're going to go to physics 2D, select box collider 2D. And again, we're going to set the isTrigger property to true. The reason that we're doing this here is because we are going to use a different condition script, which is the condition area script. So we're going to take this, drag it in, and now, so this is very much like the condition collision script, but it works with game objects with colliders that have the isTrigger property set to true. So we can pass through this and it will register a variety of different events. We have a choice of enter, exit, or stay inside. We're going to use enter. Again, we're checking for a tag, and in this case, player is in fact the tag that we want to check for. Happen only once. In this case, doesn't really matter, but we'll set it to true. And now we need to add an empty gameplay action. We're going to use a different action here, which is going to be the create object action. So we're going to take this, drop it on our game object, and let's label this. This is going to be called win trigger. And the object that we want to create, we haven't made yet. So we need to make that now. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a little UI text that just says U1. So in order to create UI text, we're going to need to go to game object, UI, text. And when we add it, it's going to add a few things. It's going to add a canvas, the text itself, and an event system. We don't actually need the event system in this case because we're not going to be clicking on our UI or interacting with it, so we can delete it. The text is going to say, you win, and it's going to be positioned in the center of the screen. So we're going to do that using the anchor presets in the rect transform. The rect transform controls the position, rotation, and scale of a UI element. We're going to click on it and then hold down the Alt or Option key and click on the center preset. That will anchor it and center it on the screen. Now we're going to set the alignment to center and middle, and the horizontal and vertical overflow modes, meaning what happens to text when it gets too big for the text box. We're going to set these to both overflow and set the font size to 48. I think the black is okay, but let's go ahead and change this to white or whatever color you like. And now we'll label this win canvas, and we're going to drag this into our prefabs folder to create a prefab. So we're going to spawn this when the player wins. So for now, it can be deleted from the scene, and then on the win trigger, we're going to drag a reference to the win canvas. The position to spawn it in won't matter because we've centered the text to the screen. And so we're just going to spawn it at 0, 0, 0, which is correct. And now let's test. So we've got our rockets chasing us. We've got our bombs. Whoop. Got a little stuck there. And it's worth mentioning, right? You can see the rockets are hitting the bombs and they're kind of flying around. I think that's kind of funny and makes the game more chaotic. You might not like that, so you could set up your own condition collision to check what hit the bomb and maybe have it explode if it hits a rocket or something. Oh, and of course I forgot to set the action. Woo. Of course. So on the win trigger, I created a slot, but I didn't drag in the create object action. So let's make sure we do that right. Drag that into the slot so that action can actually be called. And play and test again. Let's see if I can do it. You win! Yay! All right. And so, of course, you could attach some other action to the you win trigger, maybe to load a you win scene or to take you to the next level or whatever you want. Right now, I'm not getting rid of these rockets. I'm not having them self-destruct like I did in the example game because I think it's kind of funny having this huge swarm of rockets chasing the player. And there's a lot that you could add to this. You could add little explosions. You could add maybe collectible pickups that give you score. Obviously, I didn't, make it ironclad. Like the player could just go down through the hat and escape from the level, right? You might need to set up some boundaries. And I think it's hard to get out through these, but you probably could if you were like some kind of ninja. I don't think those corners are a problem, but let's see if we wait for one to go by. Let's see if we can sneak out. Nah, I don't think you're going to get out of there. But, you can round off the edges of this and polish it up if you wanted to take it further. But for me, this is more just like a really quick, loose example of working with the scripts in the Playground project, working with some 2D sprites, some basic editor skills, looking at a little bit of 2D physics, just getting around in the scene view in 2D, and hopefully it gives you some ideas for your own stuff. I highly encourage you to check out the demo projects in the scenes folder. There are a number of little games made by Ciro. You can create local multiplayer games, 2-player games, a whole bunch of different stuff, and there's some examples there. And I just thought this was a really fun idea for a project and hopefully something that a lot of people could use to teach with and that a lot of learners would get a lot of benefit out of. So big shout out to Ciro for making it. I think it's really cool. And I wanted to highlight it on the stream. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. I am going to hang out and take some questions. And yeah, thanks for watching. Lestack1 asks, what are good resources for additional 2D Unity learning? Well, I recommend the 2D UFO project that I made, which is a tutorial designed very much for beginners, but that does teach some core programming concepts. Check that one out. That's a 9 or 10 part series. It'd take you about an afternoon to go through it. That teaches total basic Unity fundamentals in 2D. So kind of similar if you ever did the Rollerball project, similar to that, but just done in 2D. Mastermind time. You just need to set that box at the top. Set is trigger to true. Mastermind writes, I can't add the winning text without having a collision box at the top, which blocks my player. I need a break anyways. Learned a lot from this. Thanks a ton. Thank you. Thanks for trying. Just set the collider on that box to is trigger so the player can pass through it. Oboe shape. Yeah, oboe shape writes, shows a nice way to put together and show how assets can be organized when giving to other people to use in their projects. Always learning. Yeah, I agree. I thought it was really cool. And you see he's written the little custom inspectors for them with the tips and stuff, and it gives you a warning if a component is missing. I just thought it was really neat and cool to play with. So I'm glad you thought so too. Yeah, make sure that your box, I'll make sure that the win trigger, the box collider 2D, its is trigger property is set to true. It's on. It is a trigger. And you should get a warning in the create object action if it's not on. Chevy Ann asks, how would you make levels? You could make levels just by creating new scenes, and then you could use the load scene action to load the next scene. Gaming Puppy says, the rocket touches me, but it doesn't reset the game. Take a look at your rocket and make sure that it has a box collider 2D on it. It's not set to trigger. Trigger is off for the rocket's collider. It has a condition collision script. You've made a new gameplay action and dragged in the load level action into that new slot that you made, and you should be good. M. Mularsk asks, the names you put the items are corresponding to the established names in the scripts. No. The names that I put were just for clarity. You don't actually need to name things the way I name them. It's just to kind of keep things organized. All right. Yeah. See everybody. See you all 2 weeks. Great to see you guys, regulars. Welcome to everybody new. Please come back and join us. It's always a lot of fun. Yeah, and we'll be doing something. The next one will not be as beginner focused. There were some people asking for some advanced editor scripting, and I'm working on some stuff for that, which I think is pretty cool, but I can't confirm it yet because I got to make sure everything is really buttoned up. But we've got some cool content in development, so there definitely will be a show in 2 weeks. I just can't announce it until I actually get it really ready. Yeah, and for those of you guys who are curious about like taking this and extending it further, the scripts in the scripts folder are really pretty like well labeled, and they have tips and stuff in them on how to use them. So I really recommend you just dig into them and play around with them and try to make some little 2D games, because it's really not that hard and you can do a bunch of fun stuff. So yeah. All right, I'm going to cut the stream, but thanks again to everybody, and I will see you all in 2 weeks. Bye.